Oh, yes, thank you. Got to turn that down a little bit. Can't hear myself think. Well, the headset is really loud. I work with a lot of younger people in this building. I mean, I'll admit it. I'm the oldest. I don't know how quickly it happened in life, but it did. I got to be one of the youngest guys at work, and then all of a sudden I was the oldest guy on air. But these younger people, I think my hearing is better than theirs, just simply because when I walk in, I put a headset on after they've been in here earlier in the sound booth. All of a sudden, you feel like you're going to have your brains turned to mush by the level of the sound. I mean, it's just incredible. The volume unit's just pumping through your brain. Your ears and your eyeballs pop out. Your tongue hangs out of your mouth. I guess it's because when we were young, we were told if we listened to loud music, our parents especially warned us. Our parents, God bless them, growing up on big bands and Teresa Brewer and the like later on in their lives, they didn't really listen to a lot of loud music, but we came along and they told us don't do that. And in my house, that was strictly enforced. So I don't go around with a case of bad hearing. What was that? Okay. But anyway, it my ears are ringing now after actually turning on the headset this morning and realizing that Benito was here. And apparently, when you need him, you have to shout across the room to get him. But anyway, on a more serious topic, or topics, we should say, because there are a lot of them going on today. We have Steve Millington coming by. He's the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. A lot to talk about with him today. He was telling me in an earlier email he has some strong feelings about the decisions by the Supreme Court last week. Of course, there were several more yesterday as well, and some of those didn't go the way that the American left wanted. So now the court is being attacked by folks on the other side after being praised by the folks on the other side over the course of the weekend. In the court, they're thinking that means they do their job well. It just, well, if everybody's attacking me, something must be right. I don't necessarily buy into that argument. We have that coming up. Also, a gas tax in Idaho goes into effect tomorrow, the new gas tax. We have seen the prices slightly down over the last few weeks. We may get a chance to talk about that a little bit later in the program. And I do want to remind people that Idaho has just placed in a survey as the fourth most patriotic state in America. And I'll talk about that a little later in the program. I think it's a fascinating story, and the people who actually put this together had a methodology in place, and I believe what they were trying to do, or they were trying to say in their methodology, I think what they were pointing at was this, that a lot of factors make a state patriotic, but I would not have asked some of the same questions, but still, they got some results that were pretty much expected. Places like Idaho and a couple of other neighboring states score well on patriotic, even the measurement they used, as well as the Deep South. But on the other hand, places like New York State is dead last. Well, the most of the population in New York State, even though it's very big geographically, lives in just one small area, specifically a handful of islands at the bottom of the Hudson River, known as New York City, and then there's some additional spillover onto something called Long Island, as they call it there. 910, or 810, excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself here just a bit. 73 at our studios. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story. So just before airtime this morning, I received an email from a friend in Texas, and it's from a publication called WorldNet Daily. Some of you may read that. I know it's not a popular thing to read on the American left whatsoever at all. But still, I think the reporting, even though it's opinionated, well, most reporting now on the web is opinionated in one form or another. Apparently, a liberal writer, and he's got some sway among some people on the American left and in government, is suggesting that chaplains who are opposed to same-sex marriage be booted out of the military. And this liberal writer refers to these people, and I'm not saying they're all men. There can be some women who have these beliefs too, who are serving as chaplains. But traditionally, it has been the role of a guy to be a chaplain in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and as well as I guess you're looking over at the Coast Guard. Did I mention the Navy as well? I wouldn't want to leave them out because sailors can get quite they get their muscles on. You don't want to get in their way. But you have to understand a lot of people who are serving in these roles as chaplains also come out of those same states that are considered the most patriotic, but they often have the strongest traditional values. This liberal writer refers to them as, quote, intolerant filth, unquote. Now, look, 10 years ago, if I had gone on the radio and said people who wanted to be in same-sex relationships or were in same-sex relationships If I had labeled them intolerant filth, there would have been calls for my head. Much less my job, but there would have been calls for my head. Now that all of these people are out of the closet and they think that they are somehow, that they've swept the battlefield of everyone, and that they're just now going to implement everything they want, everything they like, they are now referring to devout Christian chaplains in the military as being, quote, intolerant filth, unquote. How about the Muslim chaplains? Are they going to try to force them out too as well? Because I have my doubts that the Islamic chaplains would be willing to work with those people who are involved in same-sex marriages, or even officiate at any such union, any such wedding. Also, doesn't end there. Story gets, I hate to say this, progressively worse. If you're from that perspective of a traditional American belief system. Truth Uncensored. Now, remember yesterday on the program I said that after this ruling came down, we were not surprised when a publication called Politico had a big editorial piece on Saturday saying it was now time then to go forward and legalize polygamy because, hey, marriage is not about children, it's just about sex, right? It's about that sort of thing. So therefore, sex and love, and because of that, you can't get in the way of people who, if they have a yearning to have 10 wives or 10 husbands, then we should not get in their way, that we now need to legalize polygamy. And I talked about this extensively on the air yesterday, but my point was, you always heard, well, we're putting up straw men when we would talk about all of these things that would happen once a ruling came down like this from the Supreme Court. And we were told we were just full of baloney. We were told there was no slippery slope. We were just being alarmist. And lo and behold, now you've got people advocating polygamy. And then this from the website Truth Uncensored. Here's the headline. University academics say pedophilia is natural and normal for males to be aroused by children. There was a conference held, and by the way, the American Psychiatric Association was also involved in the sponsorship of this. Not in the United States, we should point out. It was held actually in Cambridge, in England. But the American Psychiatric Association was one of the lead sponsors of this. Lauren Richardson, the writer, an academic conference held at the University of Cambridge, said that pedophilia interest is natural and normal for males, and at least a sizable minority of normal males would like to have sex with children, and normal males are aroused by the thought. Well, then call me abnormal for the first time in my life. The conference, which was titled Classifying Sex, Debating DSM-5, had featured a number of scientists who spoke in favor of sex with children, which in essence is supporting pedophilia. And not only is it a sponsorship by the American Psychiatric Association, but according to the writer of this, and this is what I find even more fascinating, the Psychiatric Association was a main sponsor of this event. And then on page 5, perhaps the most controversial presentation of all was by Philip Trombovich. He is a professor at Doshisha University in Japan. He is not Japanese, by the way, but he's a professor there, who stated in a presentation on the prevalence of pedophilia that the majority of men are probably pedophiles and hebophiles, whatever that means, and that pedophilic interest is normal and natural in human males. So, all right, we've got the most important country in the world culturally has approved same-sex marriage nationwide, all 50 states. And now you've got people saying, well, okay, now we need polygamy. And then you have a conference going on, and people are saying, well, okay, now we need to normalize pedophilia. That is, i.e., sex with children. Well, what if the children refuse? Here's the question: how about your own children? Do you think that they should be brought into this? Well, think about it. Over the last 25 years, if not longer, entertainment media has been sexualizing your children anyway, through what the messages it sends them, through what it presents, how they dress them. You look at a lot of these little girls, their moms dress them like they're streetwalkers, 4 or 5-year-old kids. It's 8:16. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. Oh, doesn't end there. If you thought, well, polygamy and pedophilia, all right, well, we'll figure out how to deal with those. Fusion.net, headline, does your church ban gay marriage? Then it should start paying taxes. The writer says, Felix Salmon, the U.S. government subsidizes churches to the tune of many billions of dollars per year by giving them tax-exempt status. One conservative estimate put the sum at $71 billion, but the fact is no one really knows what the number is. Gee, this morning I was reading online a liberal writer was saying we need to bail out Puerto Rico. That's $73 billion. They consider that to be chump change. But when it comes to tax-exempt status for churches being $71 billion nationwide, then all of a sudden that's not a big deal. We need that money. The First Amendment, the writer says, guarantees freedom of religion, but that's free as in love, not free as in beer. Taxation is a purely secular affair, and by default it applies to everybody equally, whether they're a religious institution or not. It would be unconstitutional to single out religious institutions, the writer says, to make them pay more tax than anybody else. But, you always got the however, although, but that they have to throw in. Government has every right to stop giving them special tax-free privileges. One example, the Mormon Church owns a theme park in Oahu which pays no federal taxes. That's even after a Hawaii court found it not to be for charitable purposes and therefore subject to local property taxes. So they're naming the churches they're going to be coming after. There's one of them. And they're going after the really large ones. It's abundantly clear, the writer says, that religious institutions have no right to tax exemption. And then the writer says, most famously in 1983, Bob Jones University lost its tax-exempt status when it continued to bar interracial dating, as if somehow that is, they've used the civil rights movement as their template for everything that they happen to have done with this. Okay, so now we have this. You have your churches being told you're going to be paying taxes. That may put a lot of them out of business, especially if they're larger buildings that are already. Look, I was in St. Edward the Confessor on Sunday morning. The temperature outside was approaching 100 degrees. You've got to keep that place cool on hot summer days, and it's big inside. You've got to keep it hot on cold winter days. You've got maintenance costs, nearly 100-year-old church. You've got to fix the bricks and mortar and make sure that they're still in place. You've got plumbing issues. You've got all of that going on. You've got a huge roof you have to keep slating. So you've got all of these things, and now you've got people saying, well, you know what, if you don't approve, if your priests or your ministers will not perform these same-sex weddings, then therefore you're going to be losing your tax-exempt status. So, all right, now we've got pedophilia, we've got polygamy, and you have no tax-exempt status, so you'll be paying taxes too because you don't approve of all of these things. So you will be forced to comply. Do you understand how this works? Oh, you could say, I will not comply, but then once you lose that tax-exempt status, and you can't afford the taxes and the new roof and the heating and cooling bills and the plumbing bills, then you're out of business, aren't you? And that's the whole point. Wesley Pruden, editor emeritus over at the Washington Times. He says some of the gays and liberals are angry at the Chief Justice because he suggests that the ruling will pave the way for polygamy. Then he says, but not that there could be anything wrong with that. In other words, here we go. They're fine with what they got. They just don't want anybody else to have anything now. And he really goes on to say something quickly, too, if I could mention this before the break. At the very end, he says, what must be done with the clergymen who won't participate in the new orthodoxy? A town in Idaho has already enacted an ordinance to fine and jail stubborn parsons. The show has barely begun. We ain't seen nothing yet. Tell me, what town is that? Bill Colley with you. More on this topic coming up in just a moment. Steve Millington as well at 8:30, 20 after 8, 74 at our studios on Top Story. Here's a quick thought. Tomorrow, since it's an abbreviated week for us, but nothing actually changes Monday through Thursday. So that means tomorrow morning between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, you will still have an opportunity, if you have a medical question or two, to contact one of the medical professionals from Tripp Family Medicine right here in Twin Falls, Idaho. We've covered a lot of territory now with the summer. We've talked about, summer injuries people get because they're outside more often, sporting injuries and the like that often happen. Talked a little bit about heat. That's been a big issue lately for obvious reasons. And we've talked a little bit about sleep issues. Great topic last week because the percentage of the population actually identified with sleep issues is very steep. So tomorrow morning between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine right here on Top Story with Bill Colley as well on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Got to remind you, too, they're located in an office fairly easy to find. Big sign in the window on Fillmore Street directly across from the main post office in Twin Falls. And remember, life's too short not to feel good. Call it 824-75 right now. Hey, I was sharing with you some of the things that are happening, and it's just, I wrote a friend today before I was on air and said, this is all coming down so fast, so rapidly, that you can't keep up with all the changes and the demands being made by the wackos on the left who simply believe that they want to turn this into, well, Sodom and Gomorrah was just like one big sexualized bacchanalia, right? That's what we're looking at. Dwight Longnecker, who writes for Pathos, has a point today. He just came back from a European trip and says The parallels with the Roman Empire as it was collapsing are just incredible. A couple of things I want to share with you as well. Only 4 of the Republican candidates running for president actually have come out in support of redefining marriage, perhaps through a constitutional amendment. One of them, Ted Cruz, happened to appear with Sean Hannity last night.
These are 2 huge decisions. In the gay marriage decision, we have a Supreme Court justice by the name of Antonin Scalia. I read both his dissents 2 days in a row. I thought they were fabulous. But he said, I write separately to call attention to this court's threat to American democracy. A Supreme Court justice wrote that.
Look, last week, Thursday and Friday, those 2 decisions are 2 of the most damaging decisions in the history of the United States Supreme Court. On Thursday, a majority of the justices violated federal law, rewrote Obamacare in order to force that failed law on millions of Americans. And you know, to use John Roberts' famous analogy, they stopped being umpires. They stopped calling balls and strikes. And they put on a jersey, an Obama bright blue jersey, and joined a team forcing that failed law on Americans. And then on Friday, the marriage decision was directly contrary to the Constitution. It was, as Justice Scalia observed, 5 unelected judges saying their liberal policy views trump the considered judgment of 320 million Americans. It was judicial activism at its worst.
How many times have you argued before the Supreme Court?
9 times.
9 times. So that would say that he's very familiar with the operation of it. Remember, he's a constitutional scholar, was involved working in government on those issues for many, many years before getting elected to the U.S. Senate. 4 candidates of the that huge field right now. Some of them we don't know what their position is. No one has asked them, I guess, at this point. But the 4 who have been asked and said that they would support that amendment are Cruz, Scott Walker, Bobby Jindal, and of course Mike Huckabee. The others aren't so sure. And you know, you've got to go back to when they controlled both houses, the Republicans of Congress 10 years ago, and they talked about this. But as soon as the election was over, they brushed it away and they went on to other things. It was just a ploy to get Christian conservatives, obviously, to come out in large droves and vote for particular candidates. But I've got to tell you, as I was listening to that, you remembered there were 2 justices who voted in the majority on that same-sex decision, who... How shall we put this? They're retired high school softball players, and these 2 women. There was a call that I saw last week saying that they should have recused themselves from the decision. I wouldn't go that far, because there are a lot of decisions that come before the court, and you know, because of your makeup, whether it be your preference or your ancestry, whatever else, you know, you shouldn't have to bail out of it. But the fact of the matter is, this court was packed by President Obama with some of these people to get this result. Even though Sotomayor and Kagan may not necessarily be the best qualified people for those jobs, they were placed there in that position for that day when that day came along. So when Mr. Obama said he evolved on this, he did not evolve. He was just lying back in 2008, again, like Republicans lied about saying we'll get an amendment. Obama in 2008 said he was opposed to same-sex marriage because he was waving his finger and seeing which way the wind was blowing, but he was for it really all along. We know that now. That's why these people are sitting on the court. That's why he wanted them there. Coming up on 8:29, Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story. And, of course, you're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. You can email me as well at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. In fact, I've got someone coming up in the next half hour who may have some strong opinions about some of these things. He's not a shrinking violet, I'll put it that way. Steve Millington is joining us in the next half hour, the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. He's got some thoughts on many things this morning, but obviously he sent me an email earlier today saying that the Supreme Court decisions, he's gotten a lot of interesting feedback around the community from people who just simply think that we've crossed the line now, and that we may never put the genie back in the bottle unless there's something akin to what happened in this country in 1861. That coming up in just a few minutes. Already 75 at 8:30.